Reuben took the lead to get us into the station, then motioned us beside him. We hid behind a tree with gnarled roots that threatened to trip us every time we moved, and with tendrils of branches that soaked us with dripping rainwater. But it'd take more than that to stop us. I leaned out just far enough to count a small group of 5 Nazis clustered together beneath a metal overhang, the dim lamplight overhead converting their green uniforms to gray. The soldiers looked cold, but at least there they might stay dry. They should not have left their posts, but even if they had intended to monitor their assigned positions, the lure of casual conversation had apparently distracted them. I briefly wondered what they were discussing, how much they missed home, how cold and wet they'd be when their shift ended, how many Jews were murdered that day. Did they ever discuss that? Did they even think of us as people? This is a bad idea, Esther whispered to Reuben. We shouldn't be here. But we are, Jacob replied, brushing her aside to take the first steps into the train yard. The rainy night offered us little help to light our way, and had created small pothole ponds that we tried to avoid so there'd be no sound of splashing. Hanusa went next. Then I made sure to keep Esther ahead of me as we ran. Reuben followed last of all. We passed several train cars nearer to the Nazis. Some of their doors were partially opened, full of wooden boxes and metal crates, promises of supplies we urgently needed. But entering any of those would put us in full view of the soldiers. The train car we chose would have to be better positioned. On the set of tracks farthest from the soldiers, Jacob slid open the door to a car, quietly, and no wider than was necessary. I climbed inside and immediately smiled. Most of the boxes were stamped as food items, which Hanusa began gathering into a load she could carry. I handed Esther a box of first aid supplies, then said, "Stand watch near the door." When she did, I joined Reuben to study a crate at the back, marked as hand grenades. Since that was probably the most valuable thing we could take, and the heaviest, Reuben handed me the gun so that he could carry the crate. "Is it safe to take those?" Esther's eyes were wide with worry. Jacob picked up a box of dried meat, and while I looked around for something else of value, he jumped from the train car. Without warning, a gunshot rang through the night, and Jacob yelped with pain. There was no time to think or to consider what I was doing. I darted from the car and found my target, a Nazi running towards us with his pistol out, shouting for his commanders. I raised the gun Reuben had given me and fired. It created an echo through the air that put a hard lump into my gut. What had I just done? Had I really shot someone? The soldier fell and went quiet, though I didn't know if I'd killed him or if he was just unconscious. Either way, we had to run. Other soldiers were already shouting from the distance and coming closer. We dropped everything and jumped from the car, then spread out in whatever direction we could think to go. I followed Esther because she was slower than the rest of us, and finally took her hand to pull her along with me. We headed up the tracks, ending up at the back of the station on an overpass covered with vines. Silently, I pushed her to climb over the railing and then motioned for her to get behind the vines. Worried that I'd been spotted, I dropped to the ground and squeezed beneath the bottom railing, then grabbed the same vine before rolling over the ledge. I had hoped we'd have time to climb down to a thick patch of weeds below, but German voices were close behind us and growing louder. I didn't want them to see the leaves rustling, so I folded myself behind them and hoped Esther had already done the same. Once we were inside, I couldn't see her, but I heard her breathing and knew she was crying. "Stop that," I hissed. I was already angry enough. If those tears caught anyone's attention, even God wouldn't expect me to forgive her. She stopped, and just in time. At least 2 Nazis stood on the overpass, directly above us. My grip on the wet ivy was not as good as I wanted, but my foot was tangled, and that helped to prop me up. Esther couldn't have weighed much more than the ivy itself. She should be safe, though I was sure I could hear the tremble of her lower lip, as if at any second a sob would burst out in all its devastating glory. 2 of them ran this way, one of the Nazis said. One with blonde hair, the other was darker. "Poles?" the other replied. "The Jews wouldn't have done this." Whatever they believed made no difference to me. I was a Jew. I was a Pole, depending on the day, depending on the need. The blonde is the one that shot Schmidt, but we'll find them all eventually. "Do not report that there were 5, the second man answered. "If we report 5, we'll have to answer for how 5 people snuck in here. We'll report that there were 2 Poles, both girls. If they are Jews, we'll have to explain that too, and neither of us wants that. Go tell the others." He sent his companion on his way, but I heard him kick the overpass in anger. If he was the one in charge, then he'd take the punishment for our raid and his fallen man, with no prisoners to show for it. Unless the others from my cell were caught, unless Esther and I were caught. Then we'd take the punishment instead. I closed my eyes, vowing the same things I always did when I knew I was in trouble. No matter what they'd say, no matter what they'd do, I would never tell them about my cell. I would never tell them about Akiva, no matter what. Above Esther and me, the Nazi wasn't budging. I wished he would leave too, but instead he lowered his rifle by the stock and brushed it through the ivy. The thick leaves swished against my face, flicking rainwater on me. It was close enough that I could smell the metal. I pressed deeper against the wall and prayed he couldn't get at any better angle with his rifle. If he did, I'd grab the stock and pull him over the railing. I'd likely lose my own balance in the vines to do it, though, so for both our sakes, I hoped that wouldn't be necessary. He gave up on the vines, then fired a spray of automatic bullets into the grasses below. If Esther and I had 5 seconds longer to hide, that's where we would have been. We'd have been there if Esther had been a faster runner. That thought sent a shudder straight through me. We remained there for what seemed like hours, all the while the echo of my gunshot ringing in my ears, with the enormity of what I might have done to that soldier. I tried telling myself that Jacob would be dead, that all of us would be dead if I hadn't fired. Besides, it was nothing compared to what the Germans were doing to my people. When none of that worked, I silently repeated the goals of the resistance to do whatever was necessary to disrupt the German occupation of Poland. So I had. The rain finally let up, and still we waited, until my knuckles were swollen from gripping the vine, until I was chilled to trembling, until I was certain it was safe to shimmy down the vines to the road below and get back to the safe house. Esther followed me the whole way, her head down, silent as the night. Our mission had failed, and it was her fault. She was supposed to have been keeping watch. It was a great relief to find the others were safe, including Jacob, though we'd have to figure out a way to dig the bullet from his leg with the few supplies we had here. Nothing we had could numb the pain from the wound, and from the haunted look in his eye, I knew he was thinking the same thing. Beyond that, we'd returned with no supplies, and that train yard would be too heavily guarded from now on for us to return, and every soldier in Krakow would be warned to watch for a girl fitting my description. The last words I spoke to Esther were, "Don't ever ask me to trust you again."